Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone, welcome to Shape the System. I'm your host Vincent Turner. Today we're joined by Dave Levy of Mayacamas Sanctuary. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vincent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so look, let's just dive straight in. Talk to me about Mayacamas. I want to look for people who aren't in the Bay Area. They're not going to know some of these places. So I'd love for you to just sort of paint a tapestry of what this place is.
Sure. Mayacamas Sanctuary is above the town of Calistoga in the wine country, about an hour from the Golden Gate Bridge. It was a group retreat center that I became the steward owner of in 2006. It was a multi-purpose group retreat center, everything from yoga and nonprofit summits to board meetings and Burning Man being planned there to climate change summits to water summits. It was truly a multi-dimensional gathering spot. And it all burned down in the wine country fires in 2017. So we're healing and regenerating the land and our relationship with it in a go-forward called the Mayacamas Sanctuary.
Right. And just to describe the space to me, there's some amazing kind of features of this landscape.
Sure. It's geologically, it's in a crown of an ancient volcano, a caldera. So about 3 million years ago, that created the topography. It has dark skies, silence, and an abundance of aquifers, water, to keep us off the grid. And we have about 300 acres, and it's just an incredible place to renew, reflect, and connect with yourself and your group and to further whatever you're working on.
Right. And that's, I mean, when you like took, you said the stewardship of the ranch as it was at the time, was that the intention that you brought into the space, which was these spaces need to exist and this is why I need to take this on and I see the role it plays in, creative thought and how people approach problem solving and collectivization. Talk us through its role and its modality, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's really hard when you're stressed and busy to think clearly. And the inspiration for me was spending time at the Tassajara Zen Monastery and being cut off from the internet and the telephone. My mind was able to access information and feelings that I wouldn't be able to tap into otherwise. And I just had this itch to find land and to create a place where people could go and renew and collaborate and solve big challenges in society. That was the initial impetus.
Right. And where was this monastery that you referred to? Where was that?
Tassajara is in the San Pedro forest down near Big Sur.
Okay. Lovely. Another beautiful part of North California.
Yeah, amazing place. Not too far from Esalen. So these retreat centers, these power places, often that were the homes of the indigenous people of our region, became the places of gathering for modern man.
Right. And like you talked about, Esalen's one that, I think some other people would potentially be aware of as well. What's some of the thinking that traditionally has come out of these kind of spaces, not necessarily Esalen, but in these types of spaces generally?
Yeah, I think what happens when people are deeply connected to land is how do I steward that place for, a long-term purpose? And creating community on land isn't so easy. Our model was to have retreats come and go, and we had a staff that was the permanent fixture on the land. But it's not so easy to, converge nature and community and purpose. So you really have to have a long-term attitude and be in relationship with the place and the people and not look at it as a transaction as many people in real estate or hospitality do.
Right. So it's not simply, you can't simply create a function center and expect the doors to open and the creativity to flow. You actually need to, in some way, kind of create some permanence with the land in terms of your connection to it and the permanence that people will have, or the connection that people will have by extension.
Well, what we did was that we developed relationships with incredible leaders or organizations, nonprofits or corporations, and they would access the space and we would provide all the amenities. But yes, it's there's different models out there, but our model was to be the group was our customer, not the individual.
Got it. In terms of, and the group typically would come into a space or look for that with a specific intent or purpose. We need to go and, reimagine how Burning Man's going to work, or some other, specific purpose. Is that sort of how the dialogue goes between you and the group to understand whether, this is the right fit for their needs, or this is something they should look at?
Well, generally in the past, people knew about the property, and once they came there, they rebooked. So we were sold out about 2 years ahead of time. And generally people would go there to, not only to renew and relax, but to create intimacy between the group. And often when you're working in an office building or a traditional business setting, you don't really have space and time to connect with each other. So having a place for creative collaboration is really powerful.
Right. And how did you see groups, so I was going to say individuals, but groups respond to that? Is it something that came to people naturally when they get into the space? Do they just change gears, or is there a kind of an adjustment or a moment where they need to kind of rethink their relationship with the space, and as a result change their behaviors? What happens?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I was just astonished how quickly people could drop into a relaxed mindset as soon as they really walked on the land. Once they parked their car and got rid of their phones and just, take a deeper breath and feel the silence and the nature, it would immediately intoxicate them in the best kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm getting a little more relaxed just talking about it, to be honest. Is there actually, just as a curiosity there, you talked about driving in, is there even a visual separation? You drive into a place and you need to walk away from there to be into what was the ranch, now the sanctuary?
Yeah.
Do you create a visual separation of the moment that you leave the vehicle and the car and everything that represents even?
We did. I mean, there was about a 1.5 mile drive from the main road. So that process of entering the property, the landing zone, as they call it, created a bit of a transition point. And then people would park their cars away from the main retreat center, and then they'd walk into the property. So there was a nice transition that allowed people to drop in.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And you talked about 300 acres. So, there's a huge variety of kind of spaces, within the property itself. And you talked a lot about water and aquifers. Like just give me a sense of what someone's day typically looks like, or a group's day would look like in over the course of their stay.
Sure. Most groups would come either from Sunday to Thursday or Friday to Sunday. And the weekend groups were, a lot of yoga teachers and wellness workshops occurred there. Mm-hmm. So people would gather as a group, they would check in, they would be assigned to their rooms, they would then gather and be oriented to the land, and then people would be invited to take a walk and sort of leave their modern experiences in society behind. And often there would be a dinner where people could, connect to each other. And then the evening there might be a yoga class or a talk. And then the next day you'd walk up and be in the rhythm of, being in yoga or a workshop or a class of some sort with lots of space in between to swim in the lake or in the pools or to walk on the land. And, we had the fire pits in the evening. So it was really a bit like adult camp for the modern workforce.
It's actually a great segue as well, because I'm curious at this idea of the modern workforce. When you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, we're at the moment, as we record this, it's kind of middle of May. The world is in a funny place. So I probably use that term lightly, but it's a changing way in which people relate to work, and the nature of work is changing. And, we're seeing, obviously a lot of people remote now, but likely a shift towards a high degree of remote work and, to a degree, isolation, maybe social isolation or even just workforce isolation. How, that feels like that's a set of conditions that make this even more relevant. Talk to me about that.
Well, it's a extremely challenging time for our society, and the whole future of work and play and purpose is now being redefined. And I don't think we really know and fully understand what that's going to look like. But when I think into the future of Mayacamas, after the fire and rebuilding the property, we're going to be doing this in relation to the current realities. And I believe that for those that have a choice, that are privileged to work from home, that they're going to want to have deep connection with those they work with, not necessarily in an office building. So we're imagining that our property could be an innovative ancillary complement to virtual workers, so that when you do have all that time in your home, you're also having deep retreat experiences and co-working spaces on our land. And that dance between home and the Zoom experience and nature, I think will allow, companies and groups to feel that intimacy that we don't necessarily have if we're always virtual.
Yeah, and look, there's certainly a massive minority, a very small number of companies today who have always been remote. They were remote first, if you want to sort of use that label. And pretty much universally, I'm thinking about Typeform, effectively based in Barcelona, but largely remote. Buffer, who I think were out of San Francisco, but again, largely remote. And pretty much the hallmark for all these companies is a 1 or 2 times a year retreat into nature that is really not about work. Mayacamas feels like it's going to be playing a role in the way these types of companies and companies that model themselves on these companies do work and imagine they create their own culture of work. Is that's really the emergence of the sanctuary in terms of its role and a lot of what you see it doing in the future?
I do. I think that whether or not a group can convene at a retreat center or a national park or some other public space, that we are going to be living in a world where people are going to be craving human connection, and nature provides that safe place in terms of the distancing, the movement of air, all these things that we're now being told are necessary in order to gather. So, instead of building, really a fancy corporate retreat center or resort, I think what we can build is, sleeping structures that allow 1 or 2 people to have their own space, and then common areas for eating, and then obviously the natural resources for walking and potentially moving through the land in a way that's a transformational experience where people can move from one place in the land to the next and be guided in a curated experience to not only renew, but also to be creative and problem solve for whatever they're working on. So we're pretty excited about it all.
Yeah, I've seen some of the renders on the site, and the ranch prior looked amazing as well. The setting is mind blowing, so it's sort of hard to go wrong. But when you reimagine the physical spaces that you're adding, as in the buildings and the fire pits and other structures, how are you getting the balance right between enough so that people have the built environment, but not so much that, to your point, it becomes a kind of a corporate retreat center?
Yeah. I think the key is to have a micropod, so clustering in the sleeping in a dense area so there's more nature around us. And then I do think there's going to be a need for a really state-of-the-art media center, but not in the middle of the property, probably somewhere that is separate, where people can go and not only create video or do live to air conversations, but experience, for those that are not there on the land, those that are in the virtual connection to those on the land, can experience the land, if that makes sense. A certain kind of convergence
Right.
of the land with the media is what I'm imagining.
Yeah, and look, it's funny. The thing that might sound odd, but the thing that comes to mind was the very intentional, kind of deliberate layout of an IKEA shop to require you to walk through the whole IKEA shop. If you put the facilities, to use that term loosely and probably bluntly, that are on the land and on in the sanctuary in various locations that require people to move between the spaces, then so much of that sounds intentional to actually force people to take a 2-kilometre walk to get to the other part of the thing that they need to go to that afternoon. Is that sort of part of that thinking?
It is. I mean, it's interesting. When people came to our land before, often they didn't really get on the property as much as we would have liked because we weren't curating that. In the future, we will.
Right.
People would end up, being in the yoga room or in the dining room or the pool, and they would be so happy just to be with each other. They often weren't getting on the land enough. So in the future, we're going to design it in a way that really invites people to be on the land. And our model in the future is not to rent it out to groups, but for members to be sponsored in guilds who are solving big challenges in society.
Right. Help me understand a little bit more about that proposed model, because that feels like not a shift, but just a different direction.
Yeah, the original inspiration was a place where people could go to collaborate on big challenges and to be sponsored by investors or philanthropists. And when we acquired the land, we had a going concern, and we ended up never transitioning into our own curated groups. The fire unfortunately destroyed the property, but also through that, destruction, we've been sitting for 2 years thinking, how can we get back to that original vision? And what's coming through is to have leaders with some great innovation or solution to be sponsored in a process with funders to demonstrate on the land their solution. It could be ag tech or permaculture or smart homes.
Right.
And for those that aren't demonstrating on the land, to have other groups that are gathering to come up with a solution and then submit it to a group of funders to be backed and implement. So we really see this whole idea of the land being a living laboratory for demonstrating human and ecological regeneration, and probably will end up with somewhere between 100 and 120 groups that share the space.
That's fascinating. And so they use the space as a place to do the creative work, but then they also output assets, if you want to call them that, but things that solve the problem, whether it's a type of permaculture or a particular building or a way of treating water, actually onto the land itself to demonstrate the utility and value of this creation. I've understood that correctly?
Yeah, it's think of it as sort of an incubator or an accelerator.
Yeah.
Where people go there to empty out, to ideate, to imagine a solution, to harness collective intelligence, and then over a period of time, work with experts and funders to agree on an initiative and to really be deliberate in a process versus, a one-time retreat and then you go home.
Right.
To really make it a new kind of co-working, collaboratory space.
Yeah, and that was sort of going to be my follow-on question. Does that mean, it's fascinating, I've never heard anything like this, but does that mean you see people who are those leaders, those people who've been sponsored in, for want of a better word, who will actually be spending like a longer periods of time on or be coming to and from, this is an hour and a half north of San Francisco. It's a very accessible part of the world. Is that, are they going to be spending a lot more time at the sanctuary as a result? Is that sort of the mode?
I think we'll have 3 types of customers. One will be those that are demonstrating something physical on the property, and they will be there on a regular basis, some on a semi full-time basis.
Right.
Then there will be those that are, solving a challenge but aren't necessarily physically demonstrating.
Right.
And they'll probably, come there, once a quarter, because they'll be working off site, but they'll always come back to the ranch to, check in and connect and keep working on their challenge.
Yeah.
And then the third category will be the, members and families that are there with real no agenda except to experience the medicine of nature and community and, just deep retreat. And some of them maybe end up becoming, guilds or initiatives. But we want to balance the work of the physical demonstrations with the groups who are there working on a challenge with families who are able to access the land and not necessarily be held accountable to anything except their own renewal.
Yeah. Yep. Totally understand. In fact, I'm sort of seeing a lot of C's in there, right? There's creativity, there's connection, there's community. I think challenges. There seems to be a predominant theme of C's. I'm not sure. Not sure what that plays.
Consciousness, collaboration.
Thank you. Yeah. There's
communications. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something there. I'm not sure what that is. That just sort of popped in when you were talking about that.
You're seeing things in a whole new way.
Oh, great. I love it. You went there. That's awesome. Dave, how did you arrive at this location? How did you, not physically, I mean, physically, sure, but how is it that you ended up being the steward of a ranch in, North California and wanting to solve this set of problems and even viewing the world this way?
Yeah. I mean, we all have our story that everything leads to the next. I mean, for me,
sure.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., but I lived in a suburb. I wasn't in nature, but I was fortunate to be able to go to camp as a kid. And I just loved how I always felt in nature. And I think anyone who's spent time in nature, that it's not negotiable to not have that be part of your life. And when I moved to San Francisco, I had been involved in public interest fundraising and working for causes. So I was very purpose driven and living in the Bay Area, wanting to make more money to support my family. I became a merchant banker, investment banker, helping entrepreneurs raise money, helping families and entrepreneurs sell their businesses. And I ended up being one of the founding partners of a finance company that had some modest success. And I went on one of my annual pilgrimages to Tassajara, to the Zen Center. And I just got this idea that unless you get really sick or get really old or go on a deep retreat, you're unlikely to really change your life very much. And you're sort of going to be stuck in patterns.
Right.
And I just thought it would be a wonderful thing, knowing that we don't live forever, to find a place that could be a legacy around this idea that when we're generous to ourselves, we have the capacity to be generative and generous to others, and that our well-being is really connected to finding that purposeful expression for other people. And that was the seed germ of the idea. And, it's been a challenging project, but I'm committed to it more than ever, given what's happening in the world and what I see as one of the most important things, one of the most foundational things of being a human being is to manage our relationship with ourselves and in turn others. And we can't do that when we're highly stressed, anxious. So I was a sports guy. I played, Division I tennis. I got into squash.
Yep.
I was a pro squash player.
Of course.
And that was my practice.
Right.
And I always liked being at the edge of doing something that forces me to grow. And I thought, I'm going to go ahead and try to find land. And this land showed up, and it's been it's been a relationship that's allowed me to learn a lot about myself and my ego and my limitations. And really, I need to model how to collaborate and to work not on my own and to go forward, but now have really some exciting partners that have the same mindset.
Yeah. And just wanted to come back the Zen Center, was there a moment or an insight? Was there something that happened that triggered that thinking, or was it just over a period of time and exposure to that, you questioned the patterns, as you mentioned? What changed?
I think there was the .com thing was happening in, the late 90s, 2000.
Yeah.
Everyone was focused on, making money. And I just, my background was in psychology and in philanthropy and social venture. And I was like, why is it that people who make so much wealth are focused on making more wealth when they won the money game? But are they going to go from the money game to success and having significance? And I was really always been interested in that existential question of how do we give ourselves away? And I think that was sort of a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the very start of my technology career, and I'm sort of making air quotes when I say that, in the late 90s. So I have a very small microcosm of an understanding of how that must have felt in the Bay Area at that time. And this was an unusual time to be alive anyway, but also in that part of the world, I think it was a warped sense of reality, if we can use that word. So just in terms of you talked about partners coming on the journey as well. Did you find when you had taken stewardship of the ranch in its initial form that was forthcoming, or did you have to go and put that out into the world and bring people on that journey? How did that transition from you and your idea with a block of land in a beautiful part of the world to a movement, if you want to call it that?
Well, I mean, I had a relationship with a healer, Dr. Jim Gordon of the Center for Mind Body Medicine. And they train caregivers working with traumatized populations all over the world. And I think I learned a lot about healing and regeneration and resiliency, and just the amazing capacity each of us have to improve our wellness.
Right.
So, and I had a lot of relationships in the yoga and nonprofit philanthropic community, but ultimately the land just was the draw, and it naturally filled up. I think our biggest challenge has been, CapEx and improving the property, because it was a cash flow positive business, but it didn't spit out enough profits to really allow for additional investment.
Right.
So, it's really about, for me, how do you balance the material, the psychological, and the spiritual? We achieve that, but, I'm one person with limited resources. And now, I'm realizing how much we need each other to do anything. And that's, being in this place of vulnerability after the fire, it reminds me, but I think right now with what's happening with the pandemic, is that if someone else isn't doing well, you're not doing so well, and that we need each other to do anything. And I think a place like this can really model how do you bring the phoenix up from the ashes.
Right.
In a sense, our whole world is in a place of trying to figure that out now.
Yeah. And look, it highlights especially, I mean, a lot of the time when you get on the land, you see the interdependence of the things that are on the land, and it reminds you of your own both insignificance and interdependence on other things, other people, and the sort of the built world and the natural world around you. Are you thinking, just coming back a step on this, with these, you talked about 120 companies, ventures, initiatives, whatever we want to call those. Guilds?
Guilds or micro communities, I think of them as.
Guilds or micro communities. Do you see a model where ultimately you might be invested in their success such that may return the capital to then fund the kinds of things that you want, the investments that you want to make in the property itself or the sanctuary?
Yeah, very much so. We see amazing innovators that need a place to demonstrate, that need money.
Yeah.
So just like a private equity or venture capital firm might invest in something,
right,
we will be investing in these entrepreneurs and their innovations and have an economic sharing with them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I hadn't connected the dots on that earlier, but it sort of made sense when you talked about it now. You talked a little bit about your network that has come out of a lot of healers and yogis and people in the kind of social impact and kind of non-profit space. So you've got a huge amount of exposure to this kind of mode of thinking and purpose-driven people generally. Who are your go-tos? Who are the people who, when you see them and spend time with them, even, they're inspiring to you and sort of lift you up and help you with your own sort of thoughts and process?
Well, certainly Dr. Jim Gordon, the Center for Mind Body Medicine, have inspired me. And I think each of us have people in our lives that changed us. And when you look to your purpose, often it's tied to those people that brought you that gift. Mm-hmm. So for me, I've been a trustee and the major organizer of money for the center's work over the last, 20 years.
Right.
And, I see his initiative to heal trauma and restore hope, one of our, primary philanthropic activities that'll be supported on and off the land. I also get a lot of inspiration from a guy named Tom Chi, who is one of the founding partners of Google X.
Right.
And he has a venture fund to help humanity become net carbon positive. And he's helping us co-design an innovation lab at Mayacamas Sanctuary. So, I'm not technological, I'm not a scientist, but what he is doing in vetting and backing breakthrough innovators and scientists gives me a lot of inspiration.
I've had a look at some of the stuff they're doing. It's fascinating, and it's also like it appears whimsical. That's the thing that sort of makes it interesting for me. When you look at it on the outset, you're like, really? And then when you understand how you connect the dots from a hot air balloon that might ultimately become a weather balloon that might ultimately become internet for places that don't have internet, you think, okay, there's so much kind of, it's hard to connect the dots, looking forward in a lot of respects in some of this stuff. I equally find that fascinating.
Yeah.
Just before you described yourself as not a scientist and not a technology person, how would you describe yourself?
I've been called a cosmic promoter.
I love it. Oh, that's amazing. Really? Have you been called that?
I've been called a cosmic promoter, but I think
I'd take that.
I have a lot of vision and a lot of creativity,
Sure.
and I'm not afraid to take risk. And I have a way of, taking a negative and making positive contact with it. So, being a squash player, you learn how to be in the field, to be the player, and to be the observer of the player. And those three things are a big part of how I look at, higher states of human consciousness. So when we're often, in, challenging sports or challenging situations, we get into these flow states where we're not really even thinking, we're just being and doing. And it's an incredible state. So I don't know what that makes me, but, I aspire to, converge my work and my play and my purpose as one and the same.
Yeah.
And for a lot of time, I thought I was goofing off playing tennis and squash with people, but it turned out that my best friends came from that, and a lot of them became partners and lifelong friends.
Yeah. I would not look that gift horse in the mouth. Before the interview, you spoke a little bit about squash as a metaphor for a lot of this stuff. There was something in there you talked about getting back to the tee. For people who don't know squash, explain that metaphor for me, because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, sure. On a squash court, there's a service line that goes across the court, and then there's another line that goes vertically the other way, creating a tee.
Right.
And the tee is the strategic center of influence of a squash court. So you hit a shot to move your opponent off the tee, and then you move to the tee, and there's this moment when you're in the relaxed state of readiness, where you're literally in the field waiting to respond. And so that skill, I think, transfers so much to how life can be, where instead of reacting to things, we react from a place of being in the field.
Right. Fascinating. And essentially you put yourself in a position to be able to know that you can respond to something rather than, as you said, react to something by being in the right place, knowing that that's the best possible place you can be, and you just have to lock in. It's okay.
I was just going to say, the Mayacamas is in a crown of a volcano. It's a caldera. It's a power spot. And I'm sure that I was attracted to it, knowing that if that land became something I could steward, that its energy, the vortex of that energy there, would draw people to the property. So in a sense, that is the physical tee of my work life. Right.
I also think just saying I'm going to a retreat in a volcano is just cool anyway. Like you would win on that basis alone. So that's awesome. Just a question on that, actually. Like, I spent a little bit of time in the Bay Area and found, I think I would call it a mode of thinking there, which was quite prevalent in the Bay Area and California generally, and sort of even up to Pacific Northwest. Do you see this working elsewhere? Is this a model for other countries and other, cities, even in the US, to try and emulate or replicate or have their own brand of, or do you even see that happening?
Well, absolutely. And if you look at what people who have wealth do when they live in a city, they often have country places. And our goal is to democratize that experience for everyone.
Right.
So, I mean, not necessarily everyone, but for those that are, interested, I believe that every human being should have access to the healing power of nature and
Right.
in an affordable way. And I don't see why, every city is surrounded by natural beauty. And our hope is to encourage and support other people who want to bring our model of disconnecting to reconnect to their region as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating. It's a slight tangent, but there was a space in Perth where I grew up in the west coast of Australia that was on someone's farm, and it was a kind of a natural amphitheatre, but they had sort of added some limestone blocks and made it into a decent sized amphitheatre. And it created so much opportunity. And it wasn't just concerts. They had a whole bunch of talks there, and they had festivals there. They had a huge amount simply because someone had said, an hour and a half out of Perth, we're going to build this space. And nowhere else in Australia had that space. And you always questioned, well, why wouldn't that exist an hour and a half from Sydney, or an hour and a half from Melbourne, or an hour and a half from Adelaide? There's obviously a hill somewhere which you could build an amphitheatre on. And I was always astounded by that. And I think if you can create a model and publish that model, there's certainly going to be at least one person in every city who says, why wouldn't we do that here as well? Which I think is fascinating.
Yeah. No, that's great. And, when you think about it, it's a little crazy that we even have to think this way. This is how we used to live. We used to live in villages and nature, and we had to be in relationship to the watershed and to the food and to the animals and to each other. And I think that when we go into nature, it's a remembering that's deep in our DNA. So it's not that hard for people to drop in, because it's like, oh yeah, this is a remembering.
Right. This is a familiarity. And I typically ask around this point of the interview, and I think I don't know the answer, but in a world where a lot has to be done, there's a lot going on. Other than nature, how do you find your center? Like, what's the thing that sort of brings you back and grounds you and gives you the energy to sort of to keep going after, especially in the light of things like what happened in the fires in 2017?
Yeah. Well, I know that when we're stressed, we can't think well. So in my mind, we don't have time not to slow down.
Right.
And for me, that slowing down has been grounded in a meditation practice, but it's not just sitting in meditation and emptying out. I find it actually a conversation can emerge in that deep meditative state. I find it extremely creative, renewing, and energizing. And I integrate a little qigong, and I keep playing tennis and squash and going on hikes. And, I have a pretty good variety of activities that keep me grounded throughout the day.
Yeah, I love it. I can't wait to get over it. What's your timeline for the sanctuary? Do you think to have it back up and integrated and running?
We're starting to gather small groups now during the day. We have some structures, airstreams on the property. So we are gathering folks for meditation and early discussions on who wants to play.
Yeah.
I would imagine that in 2021, we'll build an off-the-grid campus on some of the key parcels. And as we bring in guilds and sponsors of the guilds, we'll build out the rest of the property. But, given that we are in a fire ecology, we're considering building things that are either fire adaptive or are light on the land so that the cost is not great if we were to lose them in a fire in 20 or 30 years. So we're going to have to adjust accordingly to the situation.
Yeah. Well, you have to adapt to nature because it's going to do what it's going to do.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, and also with all the buildings gone, it's like, how can we not screw up what already is now, which is an incredible place of silence and nature regenerating, and the wildlife has never been more abundant. We're finding that now in the whole planet, that wildlife is resurrecting because of that. So I think there's a lot to listen to right now before we go ahead and build anything significant. And there's also some incredible, modular prefab structures using, smart technology that we imagine will be part of our go forward as well. So we're not in a rush to build the permanent structures. We're more interested in how do we, gather lightly on the land that enhances the natural power that's already there.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, you've been given a beautiful blank sheet and a whole bunch of opportunity for renewal. So that's fascinating. I love it.
Yeah.
Dave, that was amazing. We'll leave it there for today. I'm so enthused to hear it, and we'll have some links to the property before and some of the things that are coming, which I saw some of the renders on the site. I'm so excited for the work that you're doing, and I'm really stoked to hear that it's all coming back together for you as well.
Well, thanks for your curiosity and giving me an opportunity to share what we're up to, and I look forward to keeping our connection going, hopefully at Mayacamas when you're out here again.
That sounds great. Thanks again, Dave. Talk soon.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.